Good Wednesday afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our first official tropical update, I guess you could say, for the hurricane season of 2024. First official after doing just weekly off-season videos, because today is the first day of the Pacific hurricane season and also the first day that we begin tropical weather bulletins in the Atlantic as well. So with that, let's begin off with looking at what we do have on the plate. First off, in the Atlantic, nothing expected in the Atlantic. Obviously, over the next 48 hours and 7 days, there's nothing, of course, since it is still only May, and we sometimes get stuff to happen in May, but it doesn't look like, at least right now, for the next week or so, anything has a chance in the Atlantic. It is a different story, however, in the Eastern Pacific. There is actually a moderate chance for development in the Eastern Pacific. Looks like we could have our first system very soon. This was tagged actually on Monday, so we've had this on the map for a few days now. But the National Hurricane Center just today upgraded it to a 40% chance, and this is potential for something to develop in the Eastern Pacific, and it could get close to Mexico, but at least the NHC right now mentions it'll remain south of the coast through early next week, but it could get close to the coast of Mexico. So this might be something we need to watch for Mexico, and of course interests along the coast and out to sea interests as well. Should watch this too, as always. But Eastern Pacific National Hurricane Center mentioning, of course, today is the first day of the Pacific hurricane season. And we also have the list of names for the season this year. Of course, if anything does develop, which looks like there is a chance that something could very soon, the first name on the list will be Aletta, followed afterward by Bud. So, we got all of our, first day kind of like introduction stuff done with. Now let's get on to what's actually happening. Starting off with the satellite loop, not only of the Atlantic but also a little bit of the Pacific as well. I also could have done another satellite loop that kind of showed half and half the Atlantic and the Pacific, but I guess this loop makes a little more sense. But you can still see at least the portion of the Eastern Pacific that is relevant to where we're watching. But meanwhile, in the Atlantic, not much going on. Quite the convective activity happening off the coast of Africa. Potential maybe that we might see our first wave very soon. We'll have to see. But other than that, nothing else going on in the Atlantic. Still, we have lots of very strong upper level westerlies indicative of strong wind shear, which is typically why we don't look for activity yet in the Atlantic this time of year. But as opposed to the Eastern Pacific, things are actually starting to get more favorable now, and you can even see it too. The ITCZ in the Pacific getting very active, and something from here is what's going to help spin up potentially and form as it moves outward from the ITCZ a little bit further north and potentially develop somewhere in this region over here over the next few days. And if we take a look at sea surface temperature anomalies, you could see Atlantic obviously remaining very warm. You just got to point that out first. But in the Eastern Pacific specifically, within that area where we are expecting development, you could see sea surface temperature anomalies there are very much above normal, as much as even a degree and a half above normal in Celsius, just off the coast of Mexico. So the bottom line, this area will have lots of ample heat to work with. Plus, of course, the fact that atmospheric conditions will be favorable. So no wonder that you could expect that something could develop in this area. And if we look at raw sea surface temperatures too, what does that mean from anomalies to how the actual sea surface temperatures are? Here's the CDAS sea surface temperature map, and some areas are registering as much as 30, even 31 degrees Celsius, which is very warm, more than enough heat and energy in the ocean for something to get going, and it looks like that could very well happen. Let's take a look at what the models are showing. Let's start off with the GFS. Moving the GFS, actually moved back several model runs. Let me see if that actually, all right, now we got it back on the 12Z run. Moved back a few runs, but I guess it resets once we go forward. But the GFS run, let's run it on the 12Z. The vorticity, really quickly though, just to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. Here's the coast of Mexico. And then here, you see all of these oranges kind of elongated right along just south of 10 North. This is the ITCZ. And this is where we're seeing, if we go back to the satellite loop, that's where we're seeing all of our convective activity right now. Kind of neat how you can kind of pinpoint what's going on in real time relative to the model showing what's happening. And this is what you're seeing right now. Lots of vorticity, although elongated and weak, but it is all associated with the ITCZ. And as we go out into time, still things looking very disorganized by hour 30. Not much happening yet, although you could see in the eastern portion something trying to consolidate, and it looks like by hour 48 it begins to do so. Still a very disorganized mess, but up until around hour 60, and you could actually start seeing isobars closing off now and stronger vorticity being registered in the models. And as we forward it out 78 hours up to 96 hours, that actually looks like a formidable tropical storm, maybe mid-high-end tropical storm, getting pretty close to the coast of Mexico and Central America. And it looks like the GFS maybe is trying to get very close to an actual impact on Mexico, maybe. But the GFS does have this getting pretty close. And then as we stop it at hour 120, which is 5 days out, kind of backs down, but still a pretty formidable system. But this is the signal that we want to look for. We want to look for a closed isobar, a closed low-level center, and we want to look for concentrated vorticity around one area, and that is what the GFS is showing, which is giving us the idea that it is indeed showing the potential that something could form. And if we look at other models too, not just the GFS showing this, but if we look at hour 120 on the Canadian model, even them, they show it happening as well. The Canadian, instead of the GFS, it kind of seems like with this kind of monsoon trough thing, tries to develop two areas of vorticity. I don't know, maybe the NHT might tag another area. Probably not, but you could see in the eastern flank as well, relative to what the GFS shows, maybe the CMC kind of gets this going a little bit quicker. But you can see by hour 72, they have that same kind of signature, closed isobars representing a closed area of low pressure and strong vorticity. On the Canadian, it has it a little bit further south from the coast of Mexico, and then once it kind of stalls out, moves very closely, very, very slowly to the north, meandering near the coast of Mexico, and then once it's done with that, it moves quickly off to the west. And then as we get towards hour 168, looks like by the end of the week, midweek next week, I guess it'll be moving westward and on a weakening trend, and let's see if the GFS shows that as well. Yes, they do. Kind of has this meandering thing that occurs near Mexico, and then once that's done with, it kind of moves westward, and with time, kind of fizzles out. So nothing too crazy happening. Obviously, it's not like we're getting a major hurricane that is going to occur in the Eastern Pacific. We're only going to be into the first week of the Eastern Pacific season, and they don't usually get something that strong right off within the first few weeks. Kind of like how the Atlantic starts off slow, although the Eastern Pacific does tend to start off a little quicker, and sometimes we could get very strong storms very early on in the season, unlike the Atlantic, which we don't typically get them. But bottom line, this doesn't look like it's going to be too much of any big sort of dangerous situation. Probably if this does bring any impact to Mexico, looking at just potentially heavy rains and nothing more than that. But not done with all the models. We still have something else to look at. And something else we'll definitely be looking at a lot throughout the season is the European ensembles. Kind of just to give us an idea of not only what the European shows, but what its ensembles show too. And even them have some development occurring. Some people are saying that the European is not as aggressive with development. You can actually see the European develops more this area off to the west a little bit more than it does with what the GFS and the Canadian are showing, which is something developing in the east. And then it moves westward as well. But there is still a signal for something to occur And once you take a look at the European and you compare that against the GFS and the Canadian, or at least the European ensembles, because this is not the operational European model. But once you compare all those three, they all show something going on in this area of the world. So I guess you could make that to believe that something might as well occur over the next week in the Eastern Pacific. Really quickly, though, just to kind of get an idea of what the model is showing for the Atlantic, and just to run the model for the Atlantic for the first time anyways, since today is the first day that they're also doing weather bulletins in the Atlantic, just to kind of show you really quickly, run it through time. There you can actually see that feature that the GFS has in the Eastern Pacific. That kind of comes in and then goes away, and then as we get towards our what went well past 7 days out, you could kind of see within 7 days not much occurs. There's been a little bit of talk about something coming off the East Coast, maybe some sort of stalled front area of low pressure vorticity with the stalled front, you know the deal. Those kind of small early season things, although the GFS you can see kind of has it pretty broad and not really consolidating much. And besides that, nothing obviously occurring in the MDR or Caribbean. Things are just not favorable yet for that to occur. So as we take it out into the next 7 days, nothing expected in the Atlantic. And obviously it is reflected with what the NHC has on its weather bulletin. So nothing to worry about yet in the Atlantic. But really quickly though, the current vorticity mentioned earlier about how it's kind of neat to see what the models show with vorticity, but we could also take a look at this graphic too. This is the relative vorticity, and this is also recently updated as well to kind of fit the current time frame. Let me actually see, is it updated anymore right now? Not yet. They've not given. I'm saying that because this map is updated every 3 hours, and this is currently stuck at 18Z. And as at least right now, as I'm recording it, it is 5 o'clock Eastern time. So maybe they have the 21Z out yet, but not yet. But you could see, don't want to go off on a rant, don't want to get off topic. But what they have in the Eastern Pacific, lots of stretched out vorticity, not like, let's say, this feature, which is very rounded, lots of strong vorticity, obviously not anything tropical, but usually when you're looking for development, you want to see something like this. You want to see something where we have very strong vorticity signatures, and you want to see them consolidated over one area instead of elongated out like this. And obviously we do not have that yet right now. This is the ITCZ, so everything is elongated and kind of stretched out. But once we start getting development, maybe we'll have to watch. And I guess it'll be neat to see over time as we start getting this system to develop, as it goes from this elongated sort of mess of vorticity to something consolidated like this. Maybe not as potent as this, but something more consolidated and more of something that we will look at and point and say, hey, that looks like something is getting going. But we don't have that yet. But when it comes to the wind shear, though, we could definitely see things are getting more favorable in the Eastern Pacific. Once again, really quickly, before I mentioned the Pacific, mentioned earlier the Atlantic, obviously not favorable yet. All of these reds in the Atlantic representing very high wind shear, small area of favorable wind shear just north of the islands, but there's nothing there to take advantage of that, and probably atmospheric conditions either way are not favorable as well. But the Eastern Pacific definitely getting more primed, lots of greens beginning to show up, so that means more favorable wind shear, and that'll probably get even more favorable over the next several days, which will then allow for something to develop as it moves off to the north, just like the models show. So things are getting going. It is the first day of the Pacific hurricane season, and once again, the first day of the bulletins. And yeah, we are here. We made it. Basically, still have a little bit of ways to go for the Atlantic, but even then, they begin today with routine tropical weather bulletins. Kind of a symptom of how much activity we had over the last few years, especially in May, which is why the NHC is starting bulletins in the Atlantic in May as well, right when the Pacific starts. And I guess to a lot of people that just makes more sense when they start together in terms of issuing daily bulletins. But the bottom line is it's happening, and it just goes to show hurricane season is basically right upon us. and in only a few weeks we'll begin to know just how active the Atlantic hurricane season will be, and just what we'll see this season. Maybe not only in the Atlantic too, but I guess shorter term in the Eastern Pacific, since we're watching potentially an area to develop, and we'll certainly keep an eye on it. Since we're now getting into the dates of hurricane season time, gonna kind of move away, and I said this on Saturday, we're gonna move away from the weekly update sort of format, and we're now gonna be going towards more daily, hopefully daily actually, tropical weather bulletins. So yes, that means you can expect a video tomorrow and a video after that. My apologies if I do not post a video, but I'm telling you right now, expect one, and we'll definitely go over any new developments that occur in the Eastern Pacific tomorrow, if, of course, anything changes. With that being said, though, I'm going to wrap it up for this first day of the hurricane season video, at least when it comes to a specific point of view, Pacific, not specific. Bottom line, you get it. It's the first day of the Pacific hurricane season, kind of the first day of hurricane season anyways for most people, even though the Atlantic doesn't begin today. But anyways, we're getting started. We have a long way to go, and today is the first day. And I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you had a good time on this first day. Can't wait to see what tomorrow brings us, and I'll be here to post a video again tomorrow. See you then.